Hey, Sully, how are you this morning?
Pretty good, man. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we thought it was important to get Coach Winkler on board from Absegami Swimming, and those kind of stories are great. I know you guys had a story recently about a young man from Lower Cape May with Down syndrome, I believe, and you've been at this for a long time, almost 3 decades, and those are kind of the stories that are really fun to write. I know you and I do a lot of writing on a daily basis, but those are the kind of stories you really can dive into, and almost you feel some emotion as you're writing them.
Yeah, absolutely, and they really show what is really great about high school sports and kind of the, it sounds like a cliche, but the true meaning of high school sports is, sports gives people a place to sort of belong to in their, in their school, being part of a team, being part of a community, and sports can really, help bridge the gap there and make somebody feel a part of something. And that's what it does, for everybody. And, I think those types of stories just highlight the special connection that playing high school sports and being on a high school sports team has for every kid who plays, who plays for their local high school. The connection they have to their school and their community, is invaluable and is a big part of the high school experience.
And Coach Winkler made a great point. He'll always go to bat for kids of this generation, and guys like myself and you, we're a little bit older, and I remember when I was in high school, there was really not a lot of effort made to be inclusive to anyone who was in the special education program. I mean, they were kind of in a separate wing of the school. We didn't really know who they were, that kind of thing. And these days, I think sometimes kids that are 16, 17 years old nowadays kind of get a bad rap, but they're so much more inclusive than we were back in our day, and I think that shows in a lot of these programs, and you see so many kids from the special needs programs being able to join up with teams and even just be a part of it, even if they're on the sidelines, and talk about that a little bit and how you've seen that evolve over the last 2 decades or so.
Well, exactly right. I mean, and you see it happening at a lot of schools now, and that just shows you just how sort of, more a part of the school and society it's become. And I think, like you said, kids today are, it's easy to be the get off my lawn guy and say kids today 20 years ago with this or that. The kids today are really, and we get to talk to them all the time. They're really outstanding individuals, when somebody questions, what about today's generation? They're really an outstanding group of people, and like you said, in a lot of ways, they're more socially conscious and more aware than I ever was as a 16, 17-year-old kid. So that's all good stuff right there.
Yeah, you see them constantly doing fundraisers and donating money to special causes. So it's so much different than when I was in high school back in the 80s. I mean, there was no tournaments to raise money for cancer research and all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool to see. And these kids, when you're talking about today's generation, not only are they doing all that, but they're getting 4.0s, 3.5 GPAs. They're socially aware. They're getting involved with their community. So it's really a cool thing to see. I don't think people of our generation really understand how much these kids are doing.
Yeah, and you see that today. I mean, you saw that at the event at ACIT last weekend. You see that event at St. Augustine today, the Shoot Down Cancer Classic out there. There's an event at Millville today. I think it's called Box Out Cancer. I think there's a cancer awareness doubleheader at Ocean City today. So there's a ton of those events going on and a ton of teams sort of, donating their time and stuff to those events.
Talk with Mike McGarry of the Press of Atlantic City. And, Mike, we had on Paul Rodeo Jr. early in the broadcast, head coach over at St. Joseph. Obviously, his father is Paul Rodeo Sr. over at St. Augustine Prep. And help us put into perspective the milestone Paul Rodeo Sr. is on a doorstep at 900 wins is almost unfathomable when you think about high school sports and you're only playing maybe 25 games a year.
Well, it is. If you do the math, it boggles the mind. And you bring up the certain person, Coach Rodeo at St. Augustine has 898 career wins going into tomorrow's game against Martin Luther King out at the Shoot Down Cancer Classic. And I talk about this with his son, Paul Rodeo, who's in his 3rd or 4th year. at St. Joe. If the Paul Rodeo at St. Joe were to win 20 games a season, and you only play about 26 regular season games, and if you play in the state tournament, you know, at the most you might get to 31, 32, 33. That's if you go to the Tournament of Champions. So if he were to win 20 games a season for the next 20 years, he'd still be 500 wins short of his father. So that puts the math in perspective and shows you just how tough it is. I mean, his son could win 20 games a year for a generation and still be 500 wins short of his father. So that just really shows you just what Coach Rodeo at St. Augustine has achieved. And, you know, I saw him coach earlier this week, Monday night, down at Wildwood Catholic, a great game. Wildwood Catholic won 65-61. St. Augustine Prep was down, 13-14 in the third quarter. They rallied to cut it to a point before Wildwood Catholic held them off. And about 5 or 6 people after the game said to me, wow, Rodeo really coached St. Augustine back into that game, really almost willed St. Augustine back into that game. And for a guy to be doing that with 898 career wins is really an amazing feat.
And he's just one of those great guys to talk to. Even after a game they win by 15 points, he's like, "Oh, I wasn't happy with the offense," and you get the feeling that the kids are going to be running the next day of practice. I mean, that's kind of what it takes to put together that kind of a legendary career, just never being satisfied, and just one of those great guys to talk basketball with, and one of those guys where you could just sit in a room and talk hoops for about 4 hours.
Yeah, I think what he does better than anything, it's not so much the X's and O's and stuff like that. It's the getting people to play together, to getting people who come from different towns, from different backgrounds, who most of whom were, let's face it, probably the best player on their 7th and 8th grade teams. He gets them to buy into St. Augustine, to buy into his system, to play for each other. And that's not easy to do. That sounds like it's easy to do, but it's not easy to do. And he does it year in and year out, I think better than almost any coach in the state of New Jersey.
We're talking with Mike McGarry of the Press of Atlantic City. And, Mike, we're getting down towards the end of January. We're starting to look ahead into February, and just a lot of movement going on in these Cape Atlantic League divisions. What's on your mind now as we get into the final week and a half or so of January? There's so much, movement at the top 3 or 4 positions of these conferences, and Cape Atlantic League tournament is going to be really, man, those wild cards are going to be so tough to get. There's probably going to be 4 or 5, maybe 6 teams going for those 2 wild cards in a couple of weeks. Yeah,
I mean, and you saw an example last night. I mean, Cape May Tech, kind of throws their hat in the ring in that United division with the Cape May Tech boys for the big win over Middle Township. So you're looking at that United division. You talked about St. Joe earlier in the week. They got a win over Pleasantville. Marcellus Ross with 26 points in that game. I think when you look at the boys' side, I think you say Wildwood Catholic, St. Augustine, and Atlantic City are kind of have kind of separated themselves from the field a little bit. But then you've got Lower Cape May, Ocean City, Millville, Holy Spirit, St. Joe, Pleasantville, Middle, Cape May Tech, all sort of fighting for those last 5 spots. And if you look at the top side of the boys, I mean, I think the big question now is who's going to be that number 1 seed, because I don't think you want to be the number 2 seed and have to play a St. Augustine or Atlantic City or a Wildwood Catholic in the semifinal and then have to beat another good team in the final. So I think you want to be that number 1 seed. So I think that's really an interesting storyline to follow on the boys' side.
Mike, how do you think Atlantic City is going to handle the rest of the season? Obviously, their gym got really messed up with that winter storm recently, and probably won't be able to get back into that gym the rest of the season. So they're playing, I guess, their home games over at the MLK School Complex. How do you think that'll affect them the next 4 or 5 weeks?
Well, I think, I went to a game earlier this week over at the MLK Complex down there in Atlantic City, kind of in the shadow of the Borgata Casino over there. And Atlantic City held off Millville, a very game Millville team that got a great effort from Rynell Lawrence, and then a guy with the best name, I think, in South Jersey, Little John Green, who's actually 6'6", 6'7" for Millville and is their big man. So I think that's one of the best names in all of South Jersey. Atlantic City comes from behind and wins that game 45-43. I think they'll be fine at the MLK Complex, and I kind of went over there covered the game at Millville, and I liked it. I think there's something to be said for them playing in the city of Atlantic City. I think they drew some different fans who, could maybe walk to the MLK complex and maybe can't get out, to the Black Horse Pike to watch the Vikings play.
Right.
The one thing Gene Allen said after the game, Millville went to the foul line in the closing seconds with a couple of free throws to tie the game. And it was loud in there, and the fans were loud, and they're close to the court. Atlantic City sometimes thinks in the high school that they don't have a big home court advantage because the gym is so big and spacious. But in that, Martin Luther King complex sits about 250 people. A lot of Vikings said, "Hey, the fans want us this game. We finally had a home court advantage." So it could make the Vikings even tougher to playing in an atmosphere like that.
Mike, have you heard anything about the Battle by the Bay and what they're going to do with that?
Yeah, I do believe there'll be an announcement. We'll have an announcement coming out. I think it's either Monday or Tuesday. I think they're in the process of sort of finalizing where they're going. I think they're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and then I think they have to make a couple of scheduling changes. But I think, if you watch pressofac.com and watch our newspaper on Monday or Tuesday, I think there'll be something coming out about the Battle by the Bay. I will say the event is definitely going to happen. Might be a few scheduling changes or shifting of some sessions and stuff. But, those contingency plans are just about done, and we should have that for you on Monday or Tuesday of this week. This
guy is a savvy sports reporter, Cole. Teasing those fans, keeping them interested early in the week. I like it, buddy.
Exactly.
Mike, before we let you go, anything really stand out at you, coming into the stretch run of January here that we should be looking out for in terms of high school basketball?
Well, I think you got some big games coming up this week. Chief among them, I think you've got Mainland Ocean City girls on Wednesday night. The Mainland girls rolling along at 12-0, and that leads into the you got the Shoot Down Classic, Cancer Classic out at St. Augustine today with a big game. Undefeated Wildwood Catholic against undefeated Haddonfield. Two teams in our top 5 in our Elite 11. Then you got Rydell Lawrence, I mentioned him before, from Millville, 8 points away from 1,000. Millville plays, I think, 4:15 against Pennsauken or Pennsville, one of those P schools at the box out Cancer Classic. But I think what I'm looking forward to this week is, again, you're looking at Paul Rodeo, a chance to get 900. You're looking at Mainland Ocean City. And that sort of leads into that ESPN 97.3 girls basketball shootout at Holy Spirit next week. So it's, if you're a high school sports fan this time of year, you can find something 7 days a week to sort of keep you occupied and busy.
Good stuff, Mike. I know you're always busy, and try to get some rest this weekend. I know you got a lot of stuff to cover, but we appreciate you taking a few minutes as always, and we'll catch up with you next weekend.
Anytime, Sully. Thanks always for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it, bud.
See you later.
That was Mike McGarry, the Press of Atlantic City.